The smell of disinfectant stung his nostrils as the broom swept across the cold tile floor. It was 5:30 a.m., and the barracks still slumbered in their military routine, while Sergeant Jonas already began another day of invisibility. His calloused hands gripped the broom handle with the same precision they once wielded weapons. His steps followed the same disciplined rhythm that once marched towards danger. But here in this hallway he knew by heart he was merely a shadow. The first soldiers began to emerge from the hallways, yawning and adjusting uniforms still rumpled from sleep. They passed Jonas as if he were part of the architecture, human furniture tasked with maintaining cleanliness while others pursued glory. Occasionally, one or another would deliberately step on the freshly cleaned area, forcing a mischievous smile as they watched Jonas resume his work without complaint. He never complained. He never raised his voice. He simply cleaned again, with the same quiet patience of someone who had learned that some battles aren't worth fighting. Jonas was 52, but his body bore marks that aged him decades beyond his chronological age. His graying hair was always neatly trimmed, a military habit time couldn't break. His eyes, the color of lead, held the depth of someone who had seen too much and spoken too little. His hands, rough as sandpaper, told stories of hard work that extended far beyond janitorial duties. But it was on his left arm that his most precious secret resided, a worn, faded sleeve with almost imperceptible embroidery, an insignia few would recognize, but which to him meant everything that remained of a previous life. One morning, while scrubbing the floor of the officers' restroom, Jonas heard firm footsteps approaching. He didn't look up. He'd learned not to make unnecessary eye contact. It avoided uncomfortable conversations and malicious jokes, but the footsteps stopped right beside him and remained there long enough to pique his curiosity. "How long have you worked here?" a deep, authoritative voice asked, but devoid of the usual arrogance. Jonas slowly raised his eyes. Before him stood a tall man, with impeccable posture, dark hair sprinkled with silver at the temples. His uniform was flawlessly pressed, and the insignia revealed him to be a colonel. He was someone Jonas had never seen before. 17 years, sir," Jonas replied, returning his gaze to the wet floor. "And before that?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Jonas sensed something different in that voice. It wasn't idle curiosity or disguised contempt. It was something deeper, more respectful. But he had learned to distrust long conversations with superiors. "I served in the Army for 23 years, sir." Colonel Robert Walker observed Jonas with renewed attention. There was something familiar about the man, something that stirred a distant and painful memory. That's when his eyes caught the detail on his left sleeve, a faded insignia, almost invisible, but one that made his heart quicken. "Where did you get that insignia?" Walker asked, discreetly pointing to Jonas's arm. For a moment Jonas hesitated. That was a question no one had asked in years. The insignia was so faded that most didn't even notice it. But the colonel had seen it, and by the tone of his voice, he had recognized it. "I earned it in hell, sir," Jonas replied, with a raw sincerity that cut the air like a blade. Walker felt a shiver run down his spine. Those words, spoken with such simplicity and contained pain, awakened a memory he had been trying to bury for decades. A failed mission, lost soldiers, an impossible rescue, and one man, a single man, who had willingly walked towards death to save those who shouldn't have been saved. "What is your full name, soldier?" "Jonas Ferreira Santos, sir." The name echoed in Walker's mind like a cannon shot. Jonas Santos, the ghost that haunted his dreams for 27 years. The man who saved his younger brother from certain execution. The hero he had only heard whispers about in classified reports. There he was, on his knees on a bathroom floor, treated like human garbage by people who should have venerated him. "Finish your work," Walker said, his voice choked with emotion. "We'll talk later." The colonel left the restroom with hurried steps, leaving Jonas alone with his own doubts. There was something about that encounter that unsettled him. The way the colonel had looked at his insignia, the tension in his voice. It was as if he had seen a ghost. In the following days, Walker immersed himself in military archives with the obsession of a detective. He searched through classified reports, forgotten files, records of missions that official history preferred to forget. Each page turned revealed pieces of a puzzle he already suspected, but needed to confirm. And when he finally found the complete report of Operation Red Storm, his hands trembled as he held the paper. There it all was. Jonas Santos, then a sergeant in the 3rd Infantry Battalion, had volunteered for a suicide mission when 12 soldiers were stranded behind enemy lines. Among them was Private Richard Walker, the current colonel's younger brother. The official mission was to await reinforcements that would never come. But Jonas disobeyed direct order. He infiltrated enemy territory alone, neutralized a patrol of 7 armed men, created a diversion that allowed the escape of the captured soldiers, and even managed to evacuate them to a safe area. All this with a gunshot wound in his shoulder and grenade shrapnel in his left arm. The report stated that Jonas received the Army's highest commendation for exceptional bravery, but for political reasons related to the operation's classified nature. The ceremony was private, and his story was never publicly released. Years later, when Jonas was transferred to administrative duties due to his injuries, his military documentation was reorganized during a bureaucratic reshuffle. Papers were lost, records were misfiled, and a hero became a forgotten number in the system. Walker closed the file and rested his head in his hands. Richard had died 3 years after that rescue, in another conflict, but he had lived long enough to marry and have 2 children. Children who existed because Jonas Santos had risked everything to save a man he didn't even know personally. That night, Walker couldn't sleep. He walked the corridors of the barracks until he found Jonas working the night cleaning shift, alone, without witnesses. The man who had saved his brother was there, in a worn uniform, cleaning the floor with the same quiet dedication with which he had cleared the battlefield of enemies. "Jonas," Walker called, dispensing with formalities. The older man turned, surprised to be addressed by his first name. "Do you remember Operation Red Storm?" Jonas slowly dropped the mop. His eyes narrowed, and for the first time in years, Walker saw something beyond resignation in that face. He saw the soldier who still inhabited that weary body. "I remember everything, sir. Every shot, every scream, every man who walked out of that hell alive. Richard Walker was my brother." The words hung in the air like dust after an explosion. Jonas didn't change his expression, but his hands slowly clenched into fists. "Richard was a good soldier, sir. Brave. He died as a hero should die. He died because you gave him the chance to live first," Walker said, his voice trembling. "You saved my brother. You saved them all, and I only found out about it today." Jonas remained silent for long seconds. When he finally spoke, his voice carried decades of suppressed pain. "I did my job, sir. Nothing more." "Your job?" Walker laughed bitterly. "Your job was to follow orders and wait for reinforcements. You disobeyed direct orders to save 12 men who had no chance of surviving. That's not a job, Jonas. That's heroism." "Heroism doesn't clean bathrooms, Colonel," Jonas replied, a sad irony coloring his words. Walker felt a rage building in his chest, not against Jonas, but against a system that had allowed a man of that stature to be humiliated for almost 2 decades, against officers who passed Jonas every day without knowing they were ignoring a living legend. "This will change," Walker said, with unwavering determination. "This will change now." Jonas shook his head slowly. "With all due respect, sir, I've tried fighting the system. It always wins. I've learned to accept my place. Your place isn't here, cleaning the floor for men who aren't worth the soles of your shoes," Walker retorted, his voice too loud for the stillness of the early morning. "Then where is my place, Colonel?" Jonas asked, a deep bitterness surfacing. "In the memory of dead men? In filed reports that no one reads? In stories that no one tells?" The question hit Walker like a punch to the stomach, because, in a way, Jonas was right. The military system had failed him so completely that even his rescue might seem inadequate. But Walker knew he couldn't simply allow that injustice to continue. Over the next few days, the colonel worked behind the scenes with the discretion of a seasoned strategist. He contacted old comrades, scoured archives in other barracks, and gathered testimonials from retired soldiers who still remembered Jonas. Each conversation revealed new details about the exemplary career that had been systematically erased by military bureaucracy. He discovered that Jonas had participated in 17 high-risk missions during his active career. He had trained hundreds of soldiers, developed combat tactics still in use, and saved countless lives over 2 decades of impeccable service. More importantly, he discovered that Jonas had volunteered for cleaning duties when he was transferred to administrative functions, not as punishment, but because he believed that all honest work was worthy of respect. It was this humility that made his situation even more painful. Jonas had never complained or demanded recognition. He had simply continued to serve in the only way allowed to him, with the same silent dignity he had shown on the battlefields. When Walker finally decided to act, he knew he needed to do it the right way. It wasn't enough to simply promote Jonas or transfer him to a better position. It was necessary for everyone to know who he really was. It was necessary for the entire barracks to confront its own collective blindness. The opportunity arose during an inspection visit from a general from higher command. Walker organized a seemingly routine ceremony, a troop presentation for the distinguished visitor. But he had prepared a surprise that would forever change how everyone saw Jonas Santos. On the morning of the ceremony, Walker found Jonas preparing the central courtyard for the presentation. The man worked with the same meticulousness as always, adjusting every detail as if it were the most important mission of his life. "Jonas," Walker called, "stop that and come with me." "Sir, I still need to finish preparing the..." "Now," Walker interrupted, with an authority that brooked no questions. Jonas followed him to the colonel's office, where he found a complete new military uniform, with all the insignia appropriate to the rank he should have held if justice had prevailed. Next to the uniform was a small box containing medals that Jonas immediately recognized. "Put this on," Walker ordered. "Colonel, I can't." "He can and he will," said Walker, his voice firm but respectful. "Today, you become who you always were. Today, everyone will know who Jonas Santos is." Jonas took the uniform with trembling hands. It had been years since he'd worn the insignia of his true rank. For a moment, he looked like the young soldier he'd been decades ago, proud, determined, ready to face any challenge. When he emerged from the office fully uniformed, his medals gleaming on his chest, a few soldiers passing in the hallway stopped to stare, confused. They didn't recognize this imposing man in the janitor they daily scorned. At 10 a.m., the entire troop assembled in the central courtyard. Soldiers, corporals, sergeants, lieutenants, majors, all formed in attention, awaiting the arrival of the visiting general. Jonas stood discreetly beside Walker, still not fully understanding what was happening. When the general arrived, the ceremony followed the usual protocol: troop presentation, activity reports, military exercise demonstrations. But when the time came for speeches, Walker asked permission to make a special presentation. "General, fellow officers, soldiers," Walker began, his voice echoing through the silent courtyard. "Throughout my military career, I've learned that the true measure of an army lies not only in its ability to win battles, but in its ability to honor those who win them for us." There were low murmurs among those present. This wasn't the type of speech expected at a routine ceremony. "Today, I want to introduce you to a man many know, but few have truly seen," Walker continued, gesturing for Jonas to come forward. "This is Sergeant Jonas Ferreira Santos, a veteran of 23 years of active service, decorated with the highest honor of the Brazilian Army for exceptional bravery in combat." Silence fell over the courtyard. Soldiers who passed Jonas every day without seeing him now observed him with expressions ranging from surprise to embarrassment. During Operation Red Storm, Sergeant Santos disobeyed direct orders to perform an impossible rescue. Walker continued, his voice gaining intensity. Alone, he infiltrated behind enemy lines and saved 12 soldiers who had been presumed lost. Among them was my own brother. Now there were audible whispers among the soldiers. Some remembered hearing stories about that operation, but never knew the details or the names of those involved. For the past 17 years, Walker continued, looking directly at some of the soldiers he'd seen humiliate Jonas. This man has worked silently among you, keeping our barracks clean and organized. How many of you bothered to learn his name? How many stopped to talk to him? How many even greeted him? The discomfort was palpable. Soldiers lowered their eyes, ashamed of their own actions and omissions. Sergeant Santos didn't ask for recognition. He didn't demand special treatment. He continued serving with the same dignity and discipline he demonstrated on the battlefields. But that doesn't mean we should ignore who he is or what he did for all of us. Walker paused, allowing his words to settle in the minds of everyone present. Gentlemen, remove your caps, he finally ordered. You stand before a true hero. The visiting general was the first to uncover his head, immediately followed by the senior officer. In seconds, every soldier in the courtyard had removed their caps, creating a moment of respectful silence that seemed to suspend time. Jonas remained motionless, looking straight ahead, but silent tears streamed down his weathered face. They weren't tears of joy or relief. They were the tears of a man who finally felt truly seen, after decades of invisibility. And now, said Walker, his own voice choked with emotion, allow me to introduce the new sergeant major of this barracks, responsible for the training and discipline of all the soldiers present here. The applause that followed was not perfunctory or forced. It was genuine, laden with newfound respect, and in many cases, sincere remorse. Soldiers, who had deliberately walked on the floor, cleaned by Jonas, now applauded him, finally understanding the extent of their own smallness in the face of that silent greatness. In the days that followed, the transformation in the barracks was radical. Jonas assumed his new duties with the same quiet dedication, but now he was treated with the respect he always deserved. Young soldiers sought his advice, officers asked his opinion on training, and even the civilian staff showed a genuine interest in learning his stories. But the most significant change happened in Jonas himself. Not that he had become arrogant or demanding, his humility remained intact. The difference was in his eyes. They no longer carried only resignation. There was a renewed spark in them, as if a part of himself that had been dormant had finally awakened. One afternoon, a few weeks after the ceremony, Walker found Jonas observing a group of recruits during a training exercise. The older man watched with professional attention, occasionally making notes on a clipboard. "How do you feel?" Walker asked. Approaching, Jonas took a few seconds to answer, as if organizing complex. "Thus, different," he finally said. "Not because they changed my rank or my salary, but because I can finally use everything I've learned to teach these boys how to come home alive." Walker smiled. That was the answer he'd hoped to hear. "Do you have any regrets about all these years?" Jonas shook his head slowly. "I've learned that lost time doesn't come back, Colonel, but I've also learned that it's never too late to start over. These boys," he said, pointing to the recruits, "need to learn that being a soldier isn't just about following orders or using a weapon. It's about serving something bigger than yourself, even when no one is watching. And if they ask how you learned that," Jonas smiled for the first time since Walker had known him. It was a tired smile, but sincere. "I'll tell you what I learned in hell, sir. And hell teaches lessons you never forget." That night,
Walking the same corridors he'd cleaned for 17 years, Jonas felt a peace he hadn't known for decades, not because his situation had drastically changed, though that mattered too, but because he finally understood that his true battle had never been against the system or injustice. His battle had been to keep his dignity intact, regardless of how others saw him, and in that silent battle, fought daily in the halls of a forgotten barracks, Jonas Santos had become a different kind of hero, not the hero of battlefields, who risked everything for strangers in a moment of courage, but the hero of silent resistance, who kept his humanity intact through years of humiliation and scorn. It was this second type of heroism that most impressed Walker. Anyone can be brave for a few minutes in an extreme situation, but maintaining dignity through years of invisibility, that required a strength of character few possess. Months later, when Jonas's story spread to other barracks, many wondered how a decorated hero could have gone unnoticed for so long. The answer, Walker knew, was simple and disturbing, because people only see what they expect to see. A janitor is just a janitor. A hero is just a hero. Rarely does anyone imagine the same person can be both. The true lesson of Jonas Santos's story wasn't in his battlefield courage, though that was also remarkable. It was in his ability to keep his essence intact through years of social invisibility, in his silent refusal to diminish himself, even when the entire world around him seemed to conspire to make him feel small. And perhaps, Walker thought, that was the kind of heroism the world needed most. Not heroes who shone for a few glorious moments, but people who kept their inner light burning through long periods of darkness. Jonas Santos had proven that it's possible to be extraordinary in a completely ordinary way, that it's possible to maintain honor even when no one recognizes it, and that sometimes the greatest heroes are those who never seem like heroes until the moment someone finally takes the time to truly see them. That night, as the barracks prepared for another day of military routine, Jonas slept the deep sleep of a man who had finally found his place in the world, not because that place had changed, but because he had learned to inhabit it with all the dignity he always possessed. And in his dreams, the ghosts of the past finally rested, because Jonas Santos had discovered that true victory lies not in being recognized by others, but in recognizing oneself, and in that, he had always been victorious. At dawn, when the first soldiers began to circulate through the corridors, they found Jonas already awake, preparing for the day's training. But now, instead of passing him by unseen, they stopped to greet him, and Jonas, with his characteristic humility, returned each greeting with the same respectful courtesy. For a true hero, Jonas had learned, isn't defined by moments of glory. He's defined by the consistency of character he maintains at all times, glorious or not.